I want to share some simple and novel ways to increase resiliency of the wrists and the affected tissue in the forearms and the elbows. This is something that is near and dear to me, having gone through, we'll call it an upgrade of the arm. And it's something that I see often with students that I work with that have these limited roadblocks in developing more capacity and resiliency in the hands, the wrists, and the forearms. It's common coming into a new approach, in this case an integrated approach to movement and physicality, that it requires in parts of the study more time on the hands. We're touching the floor, we're crawling, we're doing handstands, we're doing acrobatic work. And this newness offers a deep richness for growth and complexity, but in that we often come into these weak links that need to be brought up to speed. And if you're not used to putting weight in the hands, if you're coming from a traditional fitness approach or a discipline that doesn't really spend a lot of time understanding how to properly load the hands and the wrists, then it can often be, again, a long roadblock. It can be very frustrating and demotivating inside of practice. So whether it's learning to locomote and crawl, or doing skills like handstands or soft acrobatic work, or maybe strength skills like the planche, there are some ways to work with and around the current limitation to continue to bring it up to speed. The first is making sure that you're doing wrist preparation work every single day. You're mobilizing the wrists. You have a consistent routine that is both taking you through certain ranges, through certain motions of the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder, and then you're loading the structures by building strength. If you're interested in developing these particular processes for understanding, again, how the wrist can be better developed, send us an email, info@movementstandard.com, and we'll send you some resources for that. But that needs to be number one. The wrist and ligamentous tissue around the forearm, the elbow, being, again, that it hasn't been stressed or asked to do these specific tasks before, takes a long time to adapt. Most of the research shows up to a year in some cases of regular or consistent loading, to the point to which, again, we get to use it in the skills that we wish to use it in, handstands, locomotion, etc. So having that as a daily prerequisite, and we're talking 5 minutes a day. It could be before certain types of work, after certain types of work, or maybe integrated throughout the day. The second is learning how to make adjustments and work with different placement of the hands in order to continue to do the work. So for example, let's take a basic plank, and in a basic plank position, having this stackability of the shoulder on the wrist is important. And maybe even in that position, someone notices that their wrists are heavily limited. So what are the options that allow me to continue to do the plank without stopping planking? Because maybe someone has the strength in the totality of, let's say, the upper body, but then the limitation is the wrist. Well, we want to continue to develop their strength, and knowing later on that the wrists are going to eventually catch up, and we can use the skill itself, in this case, for example, the plank, to bring the wrist up to speed. So I don't have to just rely on the mobilization and what we're calling the strength work. I can actually have it be benefited by whatever skill is that I'm wanting to learn. So here it could be something as simple as turning the hands out, finding these different adjusted positions. For most people, their limitation of allowing the shoulder to go forward and keeping the arm locked, moving towards something like a planche position. So this tucked levered position, the wrist is not capable yet. It's not able to, from a mobility standpoint and a strength standpoint, it's not able to support that counterbalance. So turning out the hands can be helpful. It allows the shoulder to travel forward. It's going to put stress in a different position, but maybe it allows you to still do the work. So for example, in the plank, maybe I can get more work towards the direction of the planche in this case by sending the shoulders forward. If that's not an option, then you can go to something that might be more conducive to just building the strength, but it's taking out the wrist as a bottleneck. So it could be yoga blocks or something like parallettes. Could even literally be the fists, where the wrist is now neutral. It's not being asked or challenged in this extended position. And you can get the same work without overly stressing the wrist or the elbow or whatever the limitation is. But with that, it also is still needed to check in regularly and see if maybe the wrist can then, maybe in the next session or 2 sessions later, do some of the work. So initially it might be, let's say 100% of the work is supposed to be on your hands, but you're only able to do 80% of the work on your hands, literally on the hands, but then you make the other 20% supported on an object like parallettes or a yoga block. And then you graduate eventually to where then all of the work can be done on the hands. So we don't not do the work. The other option, if somebody needs an in-between that I often like to suggest, is elevating the heel of the palm. Most of the issues that people have are issues in wrist extension. So this inability of the shoulder to actually travel forward. Wrist extension would be this moving of the fingers back towards the forearm. It could be another number of things. It could be a certain weakness or lack of integrity in this wrist extensor line. It could also be tightness here in the underside of the forearm and the palm. Usually it's a combination of both, which is why the movement of the wrist is benefited by challenging and using the forearms, the elbows, and the upper arms in new ways. So this would allow for the palm to be lifted a little bit so that the angle that the wrist sits at relative to the shoulder moving forward is less of a load. It's less of a problem if I have wrist issues. So I can do the same movements with an elevated wrist, and now the difference in relation to parallettes or yoga blocks is that I'm moving closer to how I wish my hands to be, which is on the floor. Now, the more we are capable in loading the wrist, let's say in something like a plank or a planche, then obviously the more we're going to be capable in loading the wrists in various angles and elbow-shoulder relationships related to the floor. So maybe locomotion work or other types of soft acrobatic work become more easily accessible and less painful. So this is something that, as a general principle, you'll see as this improves, then the locomotive work improves. As the locomotive work improves, this also improves. We have this cross-reference of the two that brings more ease in the system as a whole. So again, if I need any of these adjustments, I can apply it to most skills. If I want to, let's say, work on a press handstand, I can use something like an elevated palm. It might be challenging, can be done, but if you're not used to working with parallettes, it might be challenging to do on the parallettes, as an example. Or a handstand push-up could be another variation of a handstand you can do on parallettes or yoga blocks, or you can do on an elevated palm. Obviously, parallettes and yoga blocks offer a different stimulus. It's this kind of rocking stimulus back and forth that I don't get when I am using a flat palm. I also have the sketchiness of being elevated. So now the hand is a little bit off the floor, so people would know immediately whether or not that's a direction that they should go. For most, elevating the palm, in this case for press handstand work, is an option, but it comes with its own challenge of now relearning how to balance with the weight a bit shifted. So if I want to press and I notice that my wrists are the limitation, so I lift the palm, the weight's now going to be much further forward in the fingers, so that when I get to the top, I'm going to have to adjust for that. So naturally, then this gets carried into handstand work. So we could see where more references and hand placement in the handstand can become a valuable tool for more options. So for example, in a handstand push-up, a common question I get is, do the hands need to be in my standard handstand position? The reality is, if we can go wider, narrower, in and out, then we have more options overall. But for most people, going a bit wider is going to give them more control in the bottom position to find that connection. And once they have more control in this width and they can turn the fingers out, it's going to translate into something like the press work. So you can see, in the case of developing the hands and the wrists and developing specific skills, there can be a lateral development that's important, meaning I'm working on various skills simultaneously, but there's also an entry point. Maybe in this case, the entry point would be a crow pose, a handstand, building capacity in a more static position, and then allowing that to be translated into other strength work. So it doesn't have to be the full version. So for example, I could do a handstand push-up with my feet still down, but maybe I have to elevate the heel of the palm because I have wrist issues. But you can see how it all eventually comes together and benefits the practice as a whole. So these are just a couple of immediate, real-time options for making these micro adjustments. I wanted to offer this just because I see two things happen: either a tendency to throw out certain skills because of certain limitations, and yet the skill itself is the valuable tool to improving the limitation, in this case, the wrist. Or people not simply having options or novel ways of working these little fine, detailed, or skillful means to allow the wrist to adapt. And so they plow through and they end up with more injuries for grinding through the work. So this is somewhere in between. We're not doing the work, but we're not grinding through the work. We're allowing this adaptation process to be a guiding principle for how we need to load the wrists, what skills we need to be working on, and to allow us to push further and more complex into our daily work. So I hope this is helpful. Again, if you are interested in some of our wrist prep or other materials, send an email, info@movementstandard.com. Be happy to point you to some of those resources. And I'd love to hear your common roadblocks and whether or not another video, something similar to this, would be helpful for your practice.